Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. It is the 4th of July, the eve before the eve before. And Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal and the host of Opinion Journal at WSJ Live at 1:30 p.m. East Coast time, joins me. Mary, a very good evening to you. We begin with a memory of someone we were very dependent upon, and then he was gone. His name is Fouad Ajami, Professor Fouad Ajami, who was an author and a commentator, wrote much for the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal on the crisis in the Levant throughout the Middle East. He was a man who had traveled a long journey from the Middle East, from Lebanon, his home, to the United States. And I didn't realize, Mary, and I ask you to reflect on this, I didn't realize how I depended upon Fouad to tell the story of the chaos each day until I didn't have him there to talk to.
That's right. Good evening, John. It's good to be with you. Fouad was a singular commentator. He was a lyrical writer, and he was someone who really didn't blame anyone but the Arabs for the problems of the Middle East. He didn't believe that it was the colonial influence or the corrosive influence of the West. He was self-reliant himself. He believed that these nations should be self-reliant themselves. And he was a passionate advocate for individual freedom, for democracy. He was a great lover of America. He was a wonderful man, and he is greatly missed. We welcome
a protege of Fouad Ajami. This is Sam Tadros of the Hudson Institute, who writes frequently of his own travels from Egypt to the United States. He's now on the East Coast of the United States. And he, a year ago, spoke to me about the last book we have from Fouad Ajami, which I recommend as a starting place because it's a collection of essays. It's entitled In This Arab Time, The Pursuit of Deliverance. Sam, a very good evening to you. I begin my question to you with three set pieces. Cairo, 2015, the assassination of the chief prosecutor against the anarchists of the Muslim Brothers in the streets of Cairo during the time of President Sisi's very careful regime looking to turn back the storm that the Muslim Brothers launched between 2011 and 2013. Then I go to Dateline, the Sinai, which is part of Egypt, and the rise of ISIS declaring war on Hamas and butchering Egyptian police as well as Egyptian military. And then I go to the Syrian civil war, Darkness Visible, with all of the tangle of the jihadists and the Islamists killing each other and killing anyone who tries to intervene. And I go to the collapse of Iraq. In fact, all of Mesopotamia is in flames. But of these anecdotes, I'm going to guess, Sam, and I ask for your comment, that Fouad Ajami would find the disorder and the threat in Cairo to be the worst, because the whole of the Ummah cannot stand, is my interpretation of what I've learned from the professor once upon a time, cannot stand unless Cairo stands. How do you measure this with your Egyptian history, Sam? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John and Mary. It's a pleasure, as always, to be with you. I think you're absolutely correct, where sometimes our gaze moves to Mesopotamia, to the Levant, to the troubles in Libya, to the carnage in Yemen. All of these are going on. But Fouad, in his last book, wrote this memorable line that the country may have lost its luster of old, and Arabs may no longer be fixated on that city. But this Arab time, the time that we are living, will be judged by what happens in Egypt. That tells us something about the importance of that country, not only Fouad's love to it, but how this country really is the shaper of this Arab future and of this Arab time that we're living.
And Sam, is Egypt threatened? John mentioned, of course, the violence in the Sinai, but you also had the murder of the top prosecutor in the country. How do you view the stability of Egypt today?
It's obviously being threatened by a number of different groups and organizations, and part of the problem is that all these things are happening at the same time. You have an ISIS affiliate in the Sinai, which is used to be called Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis, the supporters of Jerusalem. Now they've given their allegiance to the caliph of ISIS, and they're operating mainly in the Sinai, although they have been able to penetrate to mainland Egypt. Then you get another terrorist organization that's affiliated with Al-Qaeda called Ajami, Jihad mosques. Both these, of course, are designated as terrorist groups by the State Department. They're operating in the mainland. Then you have this low-level insurgency fueled by members of the Muslim Brotherhood, which throwing Molotov cocktails, attacking police stations, burning police cars. So you got all these troubles going on at the same time.
Fouad Ajami, he's gone and we don't have him to depend upon. So I look to you, Sam, to imagine for us what he would make right now of the way that the United States is treating the Levant and North Africa and Mesopotamia. The policies of the Obama administration are contradictory. There's no one policy to speak to. But when Fouad Ajami and I spoke of Syria, for example, his disappointment was profound because the United States was not lending hand for order. What do you make now? If you were speaking to the professor, what would you make of Syria? I want to concentrate on that because that's the civil war that's pulling the whole region in, and the refugee crisis is epic. It's tragic. It will be decades before it's settled. Speak for him now, if you can, Sam.
Well, I think, of course, it's quite hard to speak in the voice or take the voice of such an eloquent person as Fouad. But I would say Fouad would be extremely disappointed by the continued Syrian civil war. He visited the refugee camps there. It pained him. It pained him to see the suffering there. Damascus had been a glorious city of the Arab past. The Ba'ath regime had turned into a shadow of its old self, but it had maintained that sense of empire. The Umayyad Caliphate had lived there, had ruled the Muslim Ummah from Spain to Afghanistan from that city, and the violence there is, of course, attracting people from everywhere. Syria is not becoming the new Iraq or the new Afghanistan. It's becoming a magnet to global jihadism in unprecedented ways that we've not seen before. It's really today becoming the place, the Mecca of jihadis, where fighters from all over the world are going, where the battles of the region are being fought, with the Syrian people paying the price. Saudi Arabia is butting heads with Iran there. Turkey is meddling. The Islamic State is fighting. The Kurds are carving out territory to build their state. It's a carnage like, we've never seen something like it before.
Is it a carnage that requires the United States to step in a major way, Sam? Or is the situation so far gone that no U.S. president could send enough troops to quell the violence?
Certainly, it would require a lot of U.S. troops to put an end to it, and there's no appetite in the United States for this. But this does not mean that we replace a policy of engagement with troops with a policy of complete disengagement with actually no policy at all. What is needed is somewhere in the middle, a U.S. leadership that rallies support from local forces, that shows the kind of leadership and commitment that would encourage others to stand by the United States in order to put an end to the war there. A policy that is fighting ISIS but not touching the Assad regime leaves the Sunnis of the region convinced that the United States is not a natural ally, and it's no surprise that they then would side with the Islamic State against their Shiite oppressors.
Sam Tadros of the Hudson Institute, and we're remembering Fouad Ajami, September 18th, 1945, June 22nd, 2014. He was the Herbert and Jane Dwight Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and the co-chair of the Working Group on Islamism and International Order. Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. I'm John Batchelor.